Welcome, everyone. I'm Adrienne Dixon, Executive Director of the Education and Civil Rights Initiative. This is our webinar series, I would say monthly. We've taken a break a couple of months, but we're happy to be here. We call this You Can't Teach That. This is part two of our part two of our series, talking about the challenges to curriculum that has swept across the nation. And today we want to be a little more explicit about thinking about how we can address the curricular challenges and pushback on ethnic studies and culturally relevant pedagogy and even multicultural texts. And I'm so happy to have my colleagues here with me, Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, Professor Emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. Carl Grant at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Dr. Thandeka Chapman, who's at the University of California at San Diego, and my colleague Thais Council will be joining us. She's our Assistant Director of Community Engagement. We're happy to be have this all pulled together by Mariama Lockington. So let me tell you a little bit about the Education and Civil Rights Initiative. We are a research center that engages in high quality and rigorous research. We think about educational equity across the P20 spectrum. We endeavor to provide rapid response public scholarship. This webinar is an example of it, and that informs a kind of a broader public on timely and contemporary educational issues. And we also work very closely with our local Lexington community, the communities across the state of Kentucky, regionally and nationally, to be a publicly engaged resource and research partner. And so we are honored and happy to be here with you. Our mission and vision of ECRI is to, we're getting our slideshow back together, excuse me, is to work collaboratively with appropriate partners to ensure that education is a civil right through research, community partnerships, and innovative and responsive scholarship. And we envision a society that affirms the immutable characteristics and intersectional identities of all people, including but not limited to those who identify as or are members are African American, Black, Latinx, Asian American, and Pacific Islanders, First Nations and Indigenous people, LGBTQI+, diversely abled, first generation, and immigrant communities. Our able and capable and talented staff. As you'll meet Dr. Council, Mariama has pulled all this together for us, and Jesse Hayden is our wonderful graduate student who handles our social media, and he will be monitoring some of the questions on our Q&A. Mariama will, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A feature on this webinar. So to kind of give some context of where we are, why we're doing this. Since 2018, toward the end of the Trump administration, there was a move to restrict all equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at the federal government level, and explicitly banning critical race theory, which if anyone who engages with the federal government, you know, they weren't dealing with critical race theory. But what Chris Rufo, who was a journalist and a fellow at the Heritage Foundation, his plan was to make anything related to equity, diversity, culture, what the neoconservatives have called kind of rabid liberalism, culture, identity politics, to label it as critical race theory and to ban it from any kind of public discourse, public schooling, public education, public facilities, et cetera. And so the CRT bans, what we're calling anti-CRT or CRT ban legislation, is kind of swept across the country. So on this map, you'll see in orange, there are currently 20 cities that are considering the banning of CRT. 16 have banned CRT. The states that are in brown, so on the West Coast, and then some on the East Coast, have no restrictions. And then the green states, the bans didn't pass. So you'll see overwhelmingly that the states that have passed the bans are mostly in the South, but there clearly there's some in the Midwest, and the places that they're under consideration are across the Midwest. So so this is it's a 50-state strategy. I can't say that there are places that are inoculated, except states where that are firmly blue states, that are not purple, but that are firmly blue, have been fairly well protected. The state where we reside is, we're hoping that we'll be able to hold and not go the way of the state bans, but we'll see what happens. Along with the curriculum bans have been book banning. So banning books is not new, but what is new is, we can go to the next slide, the content, the books that kind of what they are banning. So you'll see, again, there's a text not only on race topics, but also topics related to LGBTQI themes. And so, and then books where the characters are people of color. Overwhelmingly, these books are written by people who identify in the LGBTQI plus community, and also people of color. So books by Toni Morrison have been banned, Alice Walker. So it's been some newer Black authors, male and female, who identify as male and female, their books have been banned. So they've put a full-on attack on anything, again, that is that they being the neocons have deemed as identity politics. Okay. We can move to Dr. Grant. If you can give us just a brief kind of talk about kind of multicultural education and why the genesis of multicultural education, because it feels like we're kind of back in this moment where people don't really understand why there was this movement to kind of be more inclusive and more reflective of our country with the multicultural education. Kind of what is the threat? Why would, yeah.
Well, Dr. Dixon, first of all, I really want to thank you for having me join this tremendous panel. And I also want to point a finger and raise a hand to say about the importance of this topic that you chose for us to discuss today. It is such an important topic, and it is all over the news, the print media, on television, everywhere you look. This is books and book banning, which is one of the largest form of censorship in this country. Now, the more interesting thing to me, when all of this popped up within let's say the last 2 to 3 years, it just came up. I said, oh, good gracious. This reminds me of years ago when I first started teaching. One of the reasons why I'm at the University of Wisconsin today is because as a science teacher in Chicago public schools, I was looking at what was going on in textbooks, the treatment of people of color and other people in textbooks. So that is a long history that within the small, short 15 minutes that you have given me, I don't have an opportunity to get into. But I do remember years ago, years and years ago, that books were banned because of the obscenity in it. I remember hearing Lady Chatterley's Lover, and I don't know how many of you even remember that particular title. Now, Thandeka may remember that particular title, Lady Chatterley Lover. And I can remember when I heard that that book was banned, I said, I have to get it and read it. I got the book and started reading it, and I kept looking for the pages, but there was nothing there. There is a history of books being banned. School books, certain school books were banned because of the words in there. And that has always been going on. But recently, within the last 2 to 3 years, the banning or the censorship around the word and the pictures and the writing has really taken off, and it is organized and devious. I mean, the map, the chart that you put up there, and you mentioned it shows how orchestrated it is, how planned it is, and it's all about a particular purpose. And we have to wonder about that. Now, that history of multiculturalism, and one of the reasons that organizations like NAME, the National Association of Multicultural Education, came together, and people from all over, it was because we wanted to make certain that the students, the next generation, would have voice, would read widely, would know about different philosophies and ideologies, would read about different people, whether they were gay or whether they were trans or whoever they were. You read the work of James Baldwin. He says, I'm gay, I'm Black, but then he keeps writing. So there has always been this history, and those in multicultural education, just I almost want to say fair-minded people who wanted to be educated, starting in the 70s, it took off in the 80s to say, we want to hear everyone's thoughts. We really want to know what women are thinking. I mean, one of the beautiful things today is to see the voice and the representation from different people from across the country. So the banning of books, the cutting back on words and what they mean, how we are speaking them, has a long history here that we can find. But I want to stress this point. Today it is organized, it is malicious, and as a teacher in a school, and most of the teachers in the audience, you came to be and said you wanted to teach because you love kids and you wanted to help kids. That love for kids would never have you giving kids something that was not good for them, something that would not help them. That orchestration to take away that particular help, to orchestrate it, is part of the purpose why multiculturalism is still on the rise. How much time do I have, Adrian?
As much time as you want, Carl.
No, I know better because you only gave me 15 minutes. So I wish I could look in the eyes of the the teachers and the parents and the audience to speak to them about book banning, the censorship, and to say, we want all of our children in this global society to be as well informed as possible. If they are not well informed as possible, then they're going to listen to the wrong people. Under the guidance of that teacher, that you can go up and talk to the teacher to find out what they are thinking, how they are thinking. You know that teacher. The people who are banning these books, you don't know them. So I would say let's put trust in the hands of the teacher. Then I will come back later.
Okay, thank you. That was a great introduction, kind of a context for multicultural education and its import. Dr. Chapman, you have done kind of an extensive kind of deep dive into the bill in Florida that meant all the other states have kind of, so it's Florida, but it could be Oklahoma, it's Louisiana, it's Ohio. So this language has kind of cut across. They've used the same language across every state that has adopted it and those that are attempting to adopt it. So while we're lifting up Florida, it's not exceptional or unique. Can you talk to us a little bit about the kind of how teachers can maintain their pedagogical integrity and what you've lifted out, what you've seen, what strikes you, and what advice, because a lot of, I will say Dr. Chapman is my intellectual road dog. We'll be on the phone or on text and like, girl, did you see what we need to do something. So then we have this idea and so I want to kind of pass it on to you, pass it over to you to kind of help us think about how do we pragmatically address these issues.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this session. And yes, Carl, I do remember Lady Chatterley's Lover, in part because I'm also a former English teacher, for those of you in the audience who are teachers. And there is a very spicy scene in the book, as well as the idea that women might actually want something more than to be somebody's trophy wife was and is still a controversial topic. So it's a great example of when we talk about these different laws, and especially in Florida or Texas, where it says controversial, what's controversial to one person might not be controversial to the other. And there's no clarity of terminology for these spaces when we talk about that. But I really want to talk about some of the pieces of Florida's law. Florida's law is not new, because we see, I'm sharing my screen, these same 8 tenets that keep coming back. Give myself a timer, that are in just about every anti-law, anti-CRT law in the country. And they are actually statements, much more so than what one can and cannot do with the law. And Florida is actually not the worst law. It's actually Texas, which gets overlooked a lot of the time, but Texas has parts of its law where it is now teachers cannot give extra credit for students doing social justice work. Teachers are not allowed to give assignments where students write, this literally law, where students write to their congressperson or their district superintendent or their local leadership, their mayor. It's actually illegal for teachers to have those types of assignments for children in K-12. So if you want to do a flower garden with your kids and you want to write to the mayor, a lot of teachers have them write to the mayor to get a new garden space or new playground equipment. The law is blanket. You cannot do it. It's illegal. But there are some, when we look at these laws, and I'm going to share my screen again, there are some holes, really, and I call them loopholes in place that are quite fascinating to me as a critical race theorist and also as a multicultural educator. And I do believe that, and I want to do slideshow, that the quickest way to get rid of a law is to have Black and brown people start to use it to their advantage. So while we're working on removing these laws, and there are lots of different legal entities that have filed lawsuits, we should be looking also at those pieces of the law that we can also use to put in our communities and our schools, and not just think of this as a law for people who are against CRT. And I'm going to show you what I mean. So when we talk about parental agency, there are a couple of things in this law. It says that institutions shall develop and implement methods, strategies, increase participation of students of race, color, ethnicity in underrepresented areas, including but not limited to mathematics, science, computer technology, electronics, communications, and so forth. This is now part of the Florida law, that the public schools and the College of Florida system has to develop and implement methods and strategies to increase the number of Black and brown kids and underrepresented children in these programs. As a parent, you should be asking, where are these programs? When are they coming to my school? What does this look like? And if this is not in a timeline that works for you, these are options for actually suing your state in order to get these changes and have these compromises made. The same thing down here, right? This idea of parents and their parents' rights. Students must receive accurate and timely information regarding their child's academic progress. For decades and a century, really, we're coming on the 75th anniversary, right, of Brown v. Board. When we talk about the idea of getting information from schools, schools being transparent, being able to reach out to teachers, now it's a law that teachers and schools have to give you accurate and timely information about your child's progress. You do not have to wait until you get a report card in order to have that come to you. Other areas of parental agency, and again, this is me going through the law. All public K-20 education classes shall be available. That's all it says. So taking that as interpretation, if you have a school that has less resources, if you have a school that doesn't have all of the APs that are around the state, doesn't have all of the honors, this is where you should be advocating, because it is now law that every school is supposed to have, and this is supposed to be made available. Guidance services, one of my favorites, is specifically called out in this law that says that all guidance services shall be available to students equally. Guidance services have a long history of being distributed unequally, particularly in districts and among different districts in the state, but within districts. If you're a parent and you're looking at guidance counseling, particularly guidance counselors for college-bound students or wanting to be college-bound students, having guidance counselors makes a difference. The research shows that particularly in underserved, under-resourced communities where students don't have legacies of college, that guidance counselors make the difference. As a parent, you should start asking some questions about how many guidance counselors is DeSantis now going to give you. This is also another favorite of mine. And keep in mind, I'm a legal rat, which is part of the reason I love critical race theory, how to blend it with education. This is the required instruction for African-American history. And if you go to the law, and I encourage everyone to read this law from themselves. I have just cut and pasted these pieces. This has an extensive language, and this is for teachers now, about the different ways to teach African-American history. What you can't do is violate those first 6 statements. But realistically, those statements are blustering because we don't teach those 6 statements. No one is teaching people, different groups of children, that they are better or less equal to other groups of children. So if you look at those first 8 statements, you're probably going to say, I don't teach this anyway. But this, when you look at the African American history piece, you can think about the different components that you're able to teach. And I know I'm going through these quickly. Again, when we talk about identity, right? And they've waged this idea of you can't have identity, student identity politics. But here is where, under the health education tenets and health services and mental health, we see things creep in. Now, resiliency is a critical race theoretical word that we often use to talk about how students, given whatever their backgrounds, their home, their resources, their communities, how students are able to thrive in particular ways, not just thrive, but also become advocates, become successful leaders in communities. So resiliency is one of the tenets that you can teach about in the curriculum when you talk about issues of race or class or gender. Also, this understanding and respecting other viewpoints and backgrounds. That is the core of multicultural education and social justice education. So when we talk about this idea of where it, and these are the things that they're saying that should be included, right, in this curriculum. When we talk about where to include them, or if you need to say, if someone says, hey, why are you teaching this? You take them back to the law. You say on, line 437 or 35, I'm teaching resiliency. Again, now this is a little more, but if you're looking at other possibilities within HB 7 and talking about social justice, and you might be in a district where nobody's paying attention. I've taught in a school where nobody was paying attention to what I did. A lot of teachers closed their doors. I am certainly not asking anyone to risk their jobs or risk their placements, but there are other places, right, that are specifically said that they are supposed to be areas of instruction. The study of Hispanic contributions to the United States, the study of women's contributions to the United States, and the nature and importance of free enterprise. And so when you talk about, if someone is questioning why you are teaching certain things, these are places where you can say they relate to the law and what is articulated by law that I'm allowed to teach. So as a summary of some of this, there are just a couple of things to remember. One, know the law in your state. Don't just read online overviews. Go to the law that has been drafted into law, because there are a lot of drafts before it gets voted on. Then those drafts are push and pull. Make sure that you are voting, that you are reading the law that actually pertains to your state. Use examples of Black and Brown individuals in your instruction, right? As social justice, you're able to insert the histories and experiences of racially marginalized individuals into your instruction. You can use this in science with data and historical information. You can continue to use this. Math has been doing it for a while, where we talk about word problems and problem-based inquiry that uses different examples, names, places of communities and children that where they resonate with the children in the classroom. Do things like fun facts, daily events, visuals, and art to continue to promote and keep those conversations and normalizing race and gender and sexuality in your classroom. Use factual information, right? Make sure that you're not taking something off of a blog or a TikTok or something else. Stick to the information that you know is actually factual, because that's part of the when it gets contested, being able to show that this is actual factual information. And again, stay away from using language that has been assigned CRT. You can do social justice education. You can do multicultural education for social justice. You can do critical pedagogical work without necessarily having to use the language of CRT that is currently being demonized. And with that, allowing students to do things like find their way into assignments, making sure that when you are doing assignments, that they give options for students to explore that, but they might not necessarily be the core of the work. It also fits with a social justice and social education perspective. And being clear that when you talk about institutional or structural racism, you can talk about institutions in HB 7, you can talk about structures in Texas, but you cannot blame the individual, which we weren't doing anyway. So that becomes the fine line, and some of the other practices that you might want to start thinking about or that you're currently doing, and you needed just someone to say that these make sense. All right, thank you, Adrienne.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman, that was awesome. And so we want to move to Dr. Ladson Billings, and just some thoughts that you have about kind of, because you spend some time in a number of states that are impacted by the bans. What advice, specifically do you have for teachers? And I know we both were kind of social studies teachers, so we could just limit it to that unless you want to think across content.
So thank you so much, Adrienne, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. What I'd really like to do is sort of bridge the gap between both Carl and Thandeka, if I could. There have been 2,532 instances of book bans over the last 2 years, affecting 1,648 book titles. So it's not just, oh, they banned a book, that's not a big deal. There's been a lot of it. But this is a part of US history. Book bans in the United States go back to the Puritan age. Thomas Morton's book on Puritans was banned, and he was sanctioned for it. Uncle Tom's Cabin was banned. We often have book bans. During World War II and the post-World War II era, books written by German authors were taken off the shelves. Any book that talked about Karl Marx was taken off the shelf. So this is very American to do this. We try to say that, oh, they do this in totalitarian regimes. No, we do this. We've been doing it. Typically, if the book speaks about race, if it speaks about sex or religion, is subject to being banned. But when we talk about what the law is saying, so HB 7, as Thandeka shared with us, has some very clear directives, and there are some loopholes. Here's the problem for a teacher in Florida. The Florida Department of Education has interpreted the law for teachers, and it is more narrowly interpreted. So it's hard to get around. And in fact, if you violate the law, it is a Class 3 felony. It's not a misdemeanor. So not only may you lose your job, you may never be able to work anywhere that asks the question in an application, have you ever been convicted of a felony? So if you are a librarian in Florida, according to the Florida Department of Education, you must take their online course. So to be approved, so to err on the side of caution, librarians, I went to a library in Saratoga, the woman showed me, she said, I don't have no books on the shelves. I'm not giving anybody anything because I just don't know that, they're so narrowly constructing this. So I think what I'm saying is not teachers, but community has to be out there changing this. I don't want any teacher to put his or her professional livelihood on the line because these people don't know what they want to do to you, right? So to me, some of the more effective movements have happened in Pinellas County, which is sort of where St. Petersburg is, where the League of Women Voters, coalitions of community members and the NAACP have come to the school board with students. Last school board meeting in Pinellas, the students came with Toni Morrison's book in their hand, The Bluest Eye. And they pointed out to the school board, you banned a world-renowned Nobel laureate over 2 pages, and you claim those 2 pages are pornographic. They are not. Those 2 pages are about sexual assault. That's not pornography. So you don't even know what it is you're defining, but you're doing. So I'm saying it's got to be more of a groundswell from grassroots to provide teachers with some cover. Another point that Thandeka made was talking about individuals. Well, how the individuals' lives now get interpreted. I don't know if you've seen the last interpretation of Rosa Parks' life, but it now says that she was asked to get off the bus because she was sitting in the wrong place. What does that mean? What's a wrong place on a bus? Where's the context? And we realize that Florida is an adoption state. In other words, they do state adoptions of textbooks. The textbook publishers are going to twist themselves into a pretzel, trying to make sure that they can get books adopted both in Florida and Texas. And they will say stupid things like Rosa Parks had to get off the bus because she was sitting in the wrong space. The other book that's been taken off the shelves in a school district in Florida is Roberto Clemente's book, which made me think, who doesn't like Roberto Clemente? I mean, everybody, but there's one line in the book that said he had to fight against racism. The other day, we had a parent who made a complaint that the story of Ruby Bridges should not be, that movie, it's about an hour and 20-minute movie, shouldn't be shown because it's making people feel bad. My real concern is that what will happen in some of these districts is what has just happened in the Houston Independent School District. And I'm actually sitting outside of Houston now in College Station, Texas. The state has taken over the 4th largest district in the country. There are almost 210,000 students in Houston Independent School District. There are 279 schools, half of which are failing. And the state, which can't even do the state business, is now going to try to do district business. What is likely to happen, and I've predicted and I've said it twice since I've been here in public forum, is that Houston will become New Orleans. That because the state can't run the districts. There have been no positive examples of state takeover. So what they will do is turn this district over to educational management organizations, and then they will make the district, or at least those so-called failing schools, they will become all charter. So it's a bigger issue than just what's in the curriculum. It is about the power and the self-determination of communities. It's really about democracy at stake from where I stand. So I know 20 years ago, I said public education was under attack and people thought I was being alarmist because I said I thought the agenda was the destruction of public education. And I feel really bad that I was right because that's still the agenda.
Thank you for that. Dr. Grant, did you want to add anything? We can't hear you.
No, I just think the points that Gloria raised and Thandeka raised are so right on target. I mean, and this is why I say it's in the news. You can pick up the paper and read it, and it's there. So yes, I'm looking forward to the questions that will come.
Thank you. Dr. Chapman, did you want to add anything? Did you want to share anything else? Did you have any?
I'm sorry, I was reading the questions that were
okay.
Yes, I agree. Both thinking about this as the historical legacy of not just banned books, but the historical legacy of moving forward as a country that is changing, all right, in demographics and in what we look like, and at every step, and not just the book banning, but with every step where people of color have fought to be a part of the curriculum, we make 2 steps forward, 1 step back because of policies, both higher ed policies and state and federal policies that push those actions back, right? So when we have, even when we look at things like Reconstruction and the pushback, even though Reconstruction led to large amounts of money being put into public schools because of the high rates of illiteracy in the South among Blacks, within the next, that was almost immediate, right, is your pushback. The turn of the century with the Harlem Renaissance, you have a pushback. Civil rights, you have a pushback. I mean, this is the push and pull of the nation that happens over and over again, particularly with the fight over education. And those who don't take education seriously, there's a reason why we fight over education. It is because it is dangerous, right? Ideas are dangerous and they proliferate, and people take them up and they want to change their station, their status, their families with education. And so I think that it's really important for us to discuss these issues and how both to keep teachers in mind and safe, but also parents pushing back, parents taking a hold of these. I saw something about the Parent Bill of Rights. That Parent Bill of Rights goes for every parent. That's not just white parents, right? If you are seeing something in your school that you don't want taught, you now have access to say something, right? Books, book banning. I'm so glad well, a lot of people should be really glad that I'm not a parent, because I get rid of a whole bunch of stuff by page, right? Stuff that people loved, Heart of Darkness. I get rid of Heart of Darkness. I would get rid of To Kill a Mockingbird. I know that's making people cry all over the world to think that I would get rid of To Kill a Mockingbird. I get rid of it. There are a lot of books that fall under this that as as communities of color have hurt and harmed us. And if we are going to use this law, because it is here until it's repealed, because it will get repealed. These laws are far too expensive to maintain for districts and states, like Gloria said. This idea of websites, districts being able to man women websites with the curriculum and curricular changes for each school, too expensive. But until then, we also have to think about we are citizens in these states. And if these are supposed to give parents more rights, if these are supposed to give parents more access, we are parents as well.
Yeah, I also just want to say we've been talking about K-12, but there's also a ripple effect across higher ed in these states. And right now, both Florida and Texas institutions are very worried about holding on to faculty. Right. Texas now wants to do no more tenure for new hires. Florida wants to do post tenure review. And if you are deemed to be underperforming, you can be fired regardless of your tenure status. I'm talking to folks here at Texas A&M who are looking to leave. They have several open searches because they can't get people who want to come there. Like, why would I pack up, move across the country to a place that is so uncertain I could stay there? So that's going to impact their bottom line in terms of their economy. They will become second-class institutions if this persists.
So we do have a lot of questions. I was going to ask some questions. We do have quite a few in the chat, and I think we have some time. I was going to say, for the states that are considering the bands and for teachers who are working in those areas, I don't have a sense of what unions are doing to support teachers, mostly because I study New Orleans and our union is virtually irrelevant. So I don't have a sense of other places where teachers unions have worked with teachers to support them and to kind of lobby with them. I don't know, but so I'm wondering if you all know kind of what the role, what supports there are for teachers. And I appreciate Gloria's point about, you know, we need to be thinking kind of on a different end and not put the onus on teachers to fight the fight, because they're the most at risk, particularly states that have criminalized. If it's a misdemeanor, that's one thing, but to make it a felony this is a, you know, they are trying to ruin people. And so, you know, how do you do that? By punishing them to the fullest extent. And, you know, you get a class 3 felony for teaching. It's just,
yeah, I mean, I think also what is difficult in terms of the unions is that the pattern is set just as the nation is. So the weakest unions are in the states with the craziest laws. You know, the unions are strong in the North and in the far West. They are not strong in the South. So they have teachers associations, but they don't really get to do the bargaining. I mean, they've been so, the teachers' powers have been so stripped in these different districts that it's not a lot they'll be able to do. It has to be a broader coalition. So that's why I'm looking to the NAACP. I'm looking to the League of Women Voters. I know that Benjamin Crump is working day and night in Florida, challenging. He was just in Pinellas County a few weeks ago. So that's the level that the fight has to be. It cannot just be just teachers alone. They won't win.
and poor Ben Trump, if they not killing somebody, I mean, he's all over the place trying to address some of these issues. Carl, were you saying something?
Yeah, no, I wanted to really give support to what Gloria was saying, that that's one reason why we talk about allies and allyship, that teachers really need that community help. They need the organizations in their local community to come and stand with them. And I would encourage any educator to reach out and find out where those people are, because they are there and they are concerned. It takes a little bit more time, but it is important that that we do this, because as I even looked at that first question, all of this is a fight, and Gloria used the word earlier. All of this is a fight about democracy in this country. I mean, the right to read, the right to choose to read certain things, so that you are not under an authoritarianship, that you can make choices.
Yeah.
Well,
The other point I want to make is we know we need to help teachers learn how to read the room. You know, a lot of times teachers leave our teacher ed preparation programs and they're all excited and gung-ho, but they haven't really figured out what the community, the tenor of the community is. And the community is not going to come to the aid of someone they don't know. So at some point, you do in some ways just have to take the time to not only get to know the community, but for the community to get to know you, so that you are seen as someone worthy of them standing up for. If you happen to end up teaching in a community that's a very conservative bent, I mean, you're going to lose that fight, because those are the folks who have lined up behind this kind of ideology. So please read the room, make sure you understand where the community stands on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And see, I would also add, that's why you need to know the person down in the principal's office, and where that person and the leadership and the school superintendent, what are they thinking about? How supportive are they? Because part of this is leadership pushing back and also organizing. to really to educate the next generation.
We're going to go to some of our questions. Mariama, is that you? Okay.
Yeah, and I think we can maybe just jump into this first one since Dr. Grant maybe started to answer it, and I think some of the discussion tonight has already answered it, but just give an opportunity to say anything else. But about, you know, if a teacher wants to push back or find ways to find these loopholes in laws, but they need support, what resources or best practices should they utilize? And I love the point about, you know, if you don't have trust in the community, or if you don't, reading the room is really important, first of all, but what other resources or best practices should a teacher utilize in this situation? And that's open to anyone.
I will leap in quickly and say one of the things I think teachers need to do is to organize. I mean, they need support and to come together. I know the lunch hour does not provide that much time, but for people to get together, to read things together, and to figure out next steps together so no one feels alone. So coming together, working together, reaching out into the community, finding out where other groups are, talking to the school principal if that school principal is supported.
Also, I think it's important for teachers to take stock of, well, what have you been doing before these kinds of laws were in place? Are there things that you were already teaching or reading with your students? And then that conversation was, so if I'm a 5th grade teacher, do I get a chance to talk to students in 6th grade and say, well, you know, you were with me last year, or with their parents. What did anything we taught about, or, you know, make you, quote, feel uncomfortable, or you didn't think you should have been taught? Because we're acting as if this is happening in a vacuum, and it's as if people weren't teaching certain things before.
I mean, some of this is just ridiculous to say that Rosa Parks was in the wrong place. It speaks and eats of stupidity. I mean, I hate to use that word. I'm searching for a nicer word, but really, that's what I mean. Rosa Parks was in the right place in Ruby Bridges, walking out of her home. It's gonna make somebody feel discomfort reading about that. Little girl going to school, carrying her book, wanting an education, and reading about this story is gonna make somebody feel discomfort. Oh, good gracious.
And when was comfort the measure that we use to determine learning? You know, some of the things that I've learned over the years really come at great discomfort. It's that, oh my God, that happened. I can't believe it. You know, that our job as educators is not to make people comfortable. It's to force them to think.
Yeah, it's I've just wondered, you know, I always bring this back as a social studies teacher. How do we, you know, I don't know at any point in American history where one wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And I mean, at every point of American history, there's something that we could point to as quote unquote controversial that will make someone feel uncomfortable. And so it seems to me that a lot of the, you know, that there's a lot of policing of feelings and around guilt and discomfort that is kind of contrary to what we think about in terms of good teaching. All right, Marty, I'm gonna let you go ahead, Gloria. I think you were
I was just going to say, Thandeka talked about removing Heart of Darkness. I actually would not remove Heart of Darkness, but I would always pair it with Things Fall Apart. Let's read these two books in tandem. And why are there such different interpretations of who these people are? That's when the students have to wrestle with ideas.
Yeah, and I hate Heart of Darkness. That book, I think, yes. But there are other books that I would get rid of that people, and this is the thing, right? With when we talk about banning books, everyone has different books that make them feel or did or uncomfortable, or books that constantly had the N-word in them, where I'm sitting in a classroom and every white child is excited to be able to say it because it's in the book. I'm getting rid of all those books. I'm getting rid of I'm getting rid of Romeo and Juliet because it's underage teenage practices and gang violence with two families. And when you go down this road of book banning, the problem with book banning is that it gets to a nihilism space.
Yeah.
Right? Where you could make a case to ban just about anything. And so you have the decision to make to either ban everything and have nothing in the library, or learn how to work with students to choose and understand and navigate text. Right? That is why we have media specialists. That's why we have librarians. That's why we have teachers. That's your choice, right? On either end of that, because also a lot of the books that are banned, and again, this is the politicking and the blustering. A lot of these books aren't even taught in schools. Like, these are single owned books that maybe one library in the district has that's being pulled off the shelf by the thousands, right? But teachers are largely beholden to textbooks, so that pay homage to Texas and California and Florida. So again, a lot of the books that we're banning are books that teachers use as resources and not primary text.
Can I say something? One of the things that I just love about being at ECRI is that my staff is outstanding. And one of our outstanding members that you would know is Mariama Lockington, who is a young adult author. And one of her books just was recognized by the American Library Association? And her book has actually been banned. So we're kind of proud of that. That Mariama has written, she's on her 4th book.
I'm working on
Working on the 4th. And I'm asking her to teach me her ways, because I have stuff that I need to be writing and Mariama gets it done. But can you talk about, one, being an author whose book has been banned, and just tell us the book that was banned, and because you engage with schools and young people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love these questions and these discussions. So I write for middle grade and young adults, so middle school, upper elementary, and high school students. And I write contemporary fiction about kids living in the here and now, and specifically about Black young people, young Black girls, and also about young queer people who are part of the LGBTQ community. And so my first book, For Black Girls Like Me, which is about a Black girl adopted into a white family and friendship and being the new kid, it was challenged in the state of it was challenged in Oklahoma, and then it was banned in a district in Pennsylvania. And I am sure my other books that are on shelves and currently to be on shelves will also be challenged, because they speak to issues of race and identity, gender expression, mental health issues that young people face. I think the hardest thing as an author who is seeing my work being challenged or banned is that I'm also at the same time working for a college of education, and I'm also going into schools and doing school visits or going to book festivals. And what I hear from young people about the stories that I write, or stories that other authors from marginalized identities write, is that they're life affirming, and that they're needed, and that they help build community and a sense of belonging and empathy. And so it is completely contradictory to what we're seeing as far as lawmakers and adults and gatekeepers making decisions about what young people can handle. And I also think about what texts are appropriate. We have a lot of situations where reading lists have not been updated, or we have not done the work of pairing books that maybe have taught in the past that maybe you would remove, being paired with newer works that offer more of a conversation and an opportunity for young people to understand. And I often talk about the fact that I think we're really obsessed with creating like safe classrooms, but safe doesn't mean comfortable all the time. Because you learn things when you're uncomfortable, and discomfort is not a bad thing. I think you can learn about other perspectives and backgrounds by being uncomfortable, but for some reason we're not comfortable with discomfort, or certain folks are not comfortable with discomfort. So I'm really worried. I was at the Southern Kentucky Book Festival last week, and I put a little pride flag up to be visible, and I had a lot of students in K through 12 disclose things to me about how they were feeling and how excited they were about stories that are affirming, but also how scared they are right now. And so I think a question that has come up here is just, what advice would you all as experts have for a young person or for an adult dealing with a young person who is feeling hurt, is feeling unseen, is feeling targeted by some of these laws? I think we're having teachers who are wondering how to process this themselves, but also, support the students in their classrooms who may be feeling really, really targeted by this. And obviously this is a problem in higher ed, but also specifically in PK through 12. And that was a lot, so.
First, let me congratulate you for all of your hard work. And I don't see myself as an expert. I really just see myself as a person who spends time thinking about this. And I think I read about you, now that I'm reading, look at your name, somewhere recently about your book. But I think what young people have to do, I mean, really, what did you do? You kept working at this. You did not give up. You realized that we live in a democracy and people want different stories. I have to search all over to find a story that I enjoyed reading. So therefore, the opportunity for people to write, to tell their stories, so there's more stories out there to people to choose. So I want to say, to you, keep going. And to the person who asked the question, get with other people and talk about what you want. And last point, write some of your own stories and share them.
So I would just say that the irony is that when people get their books banned, they sell more, right? So
Right.
because everybody wants to know, what is it that you don't want me to see? The problem is they can't be used in the way you really want them used in classrooms. So the workaround for me is, again, what I've seen starting to happen in Pinellas County is that community agencies like the theaters are now stocking banned books. And so when people come to a theater production, they are encouraged to take a book, it's not even a loan book. It's just take a copy of The Bluest Eye, take a copy of All Boys Aren't Blue, take the books. So that's one of the things I think that we as educators can do, is get together with our YWCAs, our arts organizations, our other community organizations, and see if they can begin stocking the books, so at least the students have a place to go get them.
And I would include, because I think that this huge void a lot of times needs to, where it was previously being filled by churches and institutions, they need to come up. Like, they need to do a come up and really be involved in not just, the idea of maintaining these books, but it is a history of peoples that we should not rely on public education for our full education. And that if you have students who are having difficulty and who are struggling with their mental wellness and mental health, and just overall malaise about these different issues, you please point them in the direction of whatever services are available. but also as teachers start to think about where can we build services and who wants to build these services with us. If you're a member of a church, start there. A lot of teachers are members of churches. That's unfortunately where some of my teachers were, who told on me on Sunday if I had done something. But there are a lot of educators, not just teachers in churches. And if you are an educator and you want to, but again, this is an additional burden. I know that means that you're doing additional work beyond your own career, your own profession, your own family. But we're going to have to do that. And where we are working with churches and the community organizations and outside groups to maintain that knowledge. And to have places where it's not only housed, but taught and discussed and disseminated in order to keep it.
Yeah, and indeed, the more serious issue, I think, is not just about, whether you can read the bluest eye or something like that, but the fact that there is other legislation coming down the pike about gender and sexuality that is dangerous. So the law as it's shaping up in Florida says that if someone is in the process of gender reassignment, number one, they must stop. Okay, so if you already started hormone therapy, it has to stop. Number two, if parents then take that youngster out of state, that youngster can be taken from the home. So this is not just about what book can you read, but this is can you actually live? Can you actually be? And that, I think, is the far more dangerous line that we are now going down, road we're going down.
Absolutely. And I think that leads into a really great next question that we did have come in from a participant, which is just that there is a law that has been passed in Kentucky called the Parental Rights Bill. It's SB 5. And it's meant to help parents keep obscene or offensive material out of classrooms. And so this participant is just wondering, that this law seems like it's going to result in bannings of books and of materials and harmful policies. So I'm wondering if any of you can provide insight on this law or similar laws and how to push back, which we've talked about already, but just any further insight.
Well, in some ways, the operative word here is obscene, and how are they defining that? Even the Supreme Court could not define obscene, and so what they settled on was a community standard. So what constitutes the community standard for obscenity? And that's not clear, and it won't, what it's going to be in New York City is definitely not what it's going to be in Sarasota, Florida.
Again, it will be interesting, these bills that they put in place, the parental rights bill in Kentucky, the parental rights bill in Florida, both have lots of language that puts an extreme, we've been talking about teachers, but there's an extreme onus on principals to do a lot of work around and a lot of additional paperwork for when parents have challenges to the curriculum, maintaining transparency of the curriculum, maintaining all sorts of different aspects and resources that they currently probably don't even have in some schools. So we are also talking about administrators being under siege and not being able to do their jobs. But when it comes to the parental rights bill, again, it is one of these moments where you really have to read the bill and see what that process is. Each state or district has to create a process for parents to engage and for parents to take, and that parents have to be able to use a media specialist or some other person. We don't know who these folks are, except for in Florida, they have to take the class that is provided to them. But in other states, it's more ambiguous who gets to say what obscene is. Some are doing community process, some are putting together a board to see what that process is, but it's not just obscene. It's in the parental rights bill, it's about just this idea of discomfort. If you find a book disquieting, or if you find a book that, doesn't fit, it could also not fit your religious beliefs or your family beliefs. We're going down a rabbit hole with these, and they are unsustainable by districts. We will see what happens with them. I think that a lot of damage will be done before people realize that this is not the way to give parents more support. And of course, the inane thing is parents already have rights. Like, parents can do this anytime. Parents can come in and ask about a book or different aspects of the curriculum. So part of what they're giving or they're putting on paper are the laws that parents are, not the laws, but the graces that parents already had. Now, whether or not they were heard and that, they were given attention, that is an issue. And I think, again, that's something we can use in underserved communities to say, now you have to respect my issues, or at least pay attention to them because they're in the law.
I think another strategy is also if we could work across state lines and to help parents in these states with these really draconian laws see that how disadvantaged their children are going to be beyond K-12 schooling, because the kids in New York will have read da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Your kids ain't reading none of this. The kids in Massachusetts will have read, to really show them you're participating in really the dumbing down of your own children, and you're hurting their chances. You want them to get into an Ivy League school, but all of their peers will have read things that they have not had access to.
And you might not have your child, it's also money, because when we talk about the African American Studies class, AP class, that's money, right? If your child gets a 4 or 5 and that is an adopted course in places like UCSD, that's one less class that you have to take and another class that you can put in there. You could do what we're seeing are most kids want to do a double major, or they want to have multiple minors. You can't do that and get anywhere near a 4.5 years, 4-year, 5-year structure without coming in with coursework done a lot of times, or spending all of your summers doing additional coursework. And that is more costly. So parents need to be aware of what this means too, because if it's offered at your school or if it's offered other places, colleges will become a ding for your child to not be accessing it.
The thing that I wanted to put in was basically the Supreme Court decision, which was in 1982, which was not really that long ago. And it was only a 5-4 victory. And it says that public schools can bar books that are persuasively vulgar or not right for the curriculum, but cannot remove the book simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books. So it's and when you Thandeka, when you say that teachers need to look closely at the law, to read it, to understand, the follow-up, that becomes very important.
So Carl, in many ways, I think what you're getting at is the bigger fight, and that is this is a fight about constitutionality.
Yeah. It's about democracy. It's about whether we want a democracy or an authoritarianship. James Baldwin said the purpose of education is so people can think for themselves. They can choose whether they want Black or whether they want white. But we want our children to be educated so they can make choices, good choices, to think for themselves and not be led by the nose by some folks.
So I kind of want to end just our conversation on that note, is that I think two things. One, I'm not convinced that they want young people to be able to think critically and make good choices. Good choices for themselves. I think that the move is to, this is a whole nother conversation, but the notion that folks want to go into secession, are fighting for secession because they see that there's a super majority in one chamber of the House, that it's easier to kind of rule people, if they don't have so many choices, right? So there are too many choices, so they're trying to eliminate choice. But the critical race theorist in me thinks that the interest convergence piece is going to emerge soon. Once the kind of bottom line hits, it hits the neoconservative, the states that are mostly ruled by neoconservatives, will see a kind of shift from these curriculum bans, and also it's ironic. I think that I was just listening to a conversation recently on a podcast that, and this is not shocking, but the states that are most reliant on federal support are the ones that are most resistant to these the ethnic studies curriculum and are most draconian in their laws around book bannings. So I think we'll see some interest convergence. We did have a last question come in, but the other thing I want to say is I want to make sure that Mariama, if you can put a link to your book and also remind us of what the award that your book got, because it's a big deal. We got American Library Association award. It's not a Newbery book, but it's in that family of awards, and so we're proud of that. We want to big it up, as they say, and make sure that people know. The last question is from. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Adrian, because again, to reemphasize, yes, we've been talking about Florida because, the media and the push to look at Florida, but Texas is a hateful place. And you can quote me to say it, because right now, the bills that are coming through there that are going through quite silently and with not visible media presence to have the type of pushback that we're seeing in Florida are devastating. And it's an interesting idea because just 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Big Texas Oil put a ton of money into getting, scholars of color, critical scholars of color, to come to Austin and do their work so that they could be seen as a #1 school, so that they could be seen as this stellar R1 school. And the amount of money where they were just offering scholars and basically, raiding coffers of other institutions to get folks to Austin will be all but gone in the next few years, because those folks are not going to stay. No. And so your R1, Lone Star State stellar institution is going to be back to an ignominious existence. Because your football team isn't really very good, and your basketball team just got out. So, so I think that the consequences of these decisions will also make these laws less sustaining than people think. That these are things that might change rather quickly when you realize that there's no draw for a large business organization to come in and make your state a home when the people who are there won't be able to have their children taught well.
Yeah, and the Texas legislature, they had hearings today on the tenure question. Angela Valenzuela was at that meeting.
Mm-hmm. So to close, Gary Price has a question and a statement. I think he says, regrettably dangerous irony is that teachers who are in a better position than most parents to appreciate the range of many children's concerns and needs are vulnerable to those who want to silence them. They need invulnerable allies like retirees how might potential allies be recruited and enabled? And I say this every time. I've done a couple of interviews and both on radio and print. And I say that one thing that I think that we don't do well enough as educators is reach across the constituencies that we have in our schools, that we need to organize. We need to organize with the cafeteria ladies. We need to organize with the custodians. We need to organize really robustly with other folks in labor unions. One of the laments that we have in New Orleans is that, you know, that the relationship between real labor unions and the teachers union in New Orleans wasn't as strong as it was after Katrina. And so for a myriad of reasons, it wasn't just that teachers were highfalutin, everybody was struggling and trying to figure it out. So workers in general, the labor unions were struggling. But I think we have to do a better job of learning how to organize, or at least participating in organizing efforts. And that requires being humble and being in community. And as when we talk about culturally relevant pedagogy, as culturally relevant teachers, we are connected to the communities in which we teach. It's not enough of us who are connected in that way. So I think we have to encourage and be open. And I do, to Gary's question, is those of us who are in a position to not be reliant on the state for our school districts, is to kind of go in and try to be that human shield, if you will, for teachers and communities and families.
And hi, Dr. Price. That I
Is that
actually
Darren
think
Price?
Yeah.
yes, I actually don't think that there's such a thing as an invulnerable ally. I think allyship comes at a risk no matter what. I'm sure Disney thought that they were invulnerable, and you see how Florida is taking them apart.
Disney winning. Disney winning. You didn't see what Disney did last night. That mouse is 94 years old. That mouse is not just in Florida. That mouse is in Florida, California,
Worldwide.
Tokyo, Paris, ABC, ESPN. It's a magic kingdom, not a magic state. And so what that board put in place before the governor's board could get seated, constrains them like crazy.
It does.
You can't get in front of that mouse. That's the king of the rats.
And he's boss. Okay, but he's boss.
Gloria,
He's a rat, boy. He's a
Nigga,
94-year-old rat.
He's a bad, shut your mouth, but a rat. But even the gall, right? And they knew Disney is protected, but even the gall to go after a corporation that basically holds the top half of your state together, right? One of the things that we know with CRT is that racism acts against people's best interest, right? And that is one of the pieces where at this moment, when you are going to be an ally, when you're going to push against the system, and we will have to have teachers who push against the system, because just like Rosa Parks sat on that bus
in the
In the wrong place.
in the wrong place and had to be arrested in order for the case to incite and to move, we will have to there will unfortunately be canaries in these instances. And I think there are, again, hopefully NAACP, other lawyers who are ready to carry these canaries up to the air and into the light. But I don't think there is anything such as an invulnerable ally. I think to be an ally means that you're risking.
Let me turn this over because it's how you gonna cut off 3 Black people from talking. So we are, well, unfortunately, you ain't got to go home, but our Zoom will shut down pretty quickly. I want to turn this over to my colleague, my academic cousin, Dr. Council. So go ahead, Dr. Council.
Yes, I have nothing to add, nothing to sum here. I just want to say thank you so much to Dr. Ladson Billings, Dr. Grant, and Dr. Chapman to be in your presence today, to hear your words of wisdom, and to hear you telling us kind of the playbook for what we need to do to kind of go forward is amazing, and I'm super excited. I do want to, just for a second though, put our mission in the chat, because as you all were talking, I was kind of mapping out what our next steps needs to be as an education and civil rights initiative. And so it is our mission, right, to work collaboratively with appropriate partners. And in this conversation, we've outlined several appropriate partners, right? And this is our first year under the leadership of Dr. Adrian Dixon, but we are deeply rooted in our communities. That means that we want to hear from you. We want to be community informed in the programming and the research that we do. We want to be community responsive in the programming and the research that we put forward. And while this was a teach-in, this isn't the only teach-in that we have to do, right? We could do more teach-ins. We could do organizing through this platform. We can read more banned books through this platform and build an intellectual community with one another, which is what I'm hearing that these laws and initiatives are trying to take away from us. And I just want to say though, as a native Floridian, I just find it so hard that Ron DeSantis, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say DeSantis.
That's nice.
Thank you. That while our state is flooding, right? I have folks whose homes will never be again, right? This is what he wants to spend his time. And I just think that's an injustice to everyone. And so here is our Twitter account, our IG account. Please follow us. Our website is here, and I invite you to email us. Email me, Dr. Thais Council, thais.council@ukY.edu. Email Dr. Adrian Dixon. Email Mariama Lackington, our award-winning novelist, and give us your ideas and come and talk to us about some ways that we can continue to have these conversations, continue to teach and continue to push this work forward here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but also nationally. So thank you all for being here today. And we will have this up on our YouTube page soon. Take care.
Also in May, we will be, we have a symposium.
It was in my notes.
Yes, sorry, Dr. Council, I forgot to remind you of that. Our symposium is May 4th, May 5th. Look, I'm forgetting, on AERA's virtual platform. Dr. Ladson Billings is our discussant. My colleague, Dr. Jamel Donner will be the chair, and we are talking about is education a civil right? And Christopher Saldana, who is an assistant professor at Wisconsin, Mark Page, who's at UMass Dartmouth. They are our JD PhD colleagues who are going to be kind of giving us the legal angle. And we're going to wrestle with this question, education as a civil right. So please join us on AERA's virtual conference platform. Thank you.
Well done.
That was awesome.